Yeah, so the reason I'm running in the election is to help reduce poverty and address challenges that are presented to low-income individuals or families. These are issues that I've personally experienced. In the past, I've been homeless. I've worked minimum wage jobs and had trouble keeping a roof over my head or putting food on the table. I've had to go to food banks. I'm very thankful that I'm in a much better situation now personally, but I see a lot of other people and families in St. John who are not enjoying those same benefits, and I don't really see a lot of other people in power really doing anything to change that situation, or if anything, the changes they're making are making it worse. So I wanted to do something to help. So I'm going to be completely upfront with this. I do not live in Portland-Simonds specifically. I actually live right at the edge of Uptown.
Okay.
I'm about a 5-minute drive outside Portland-Simonds, so I'm not totally disconnected from the area.
Okay.
But I'm also a relatively recent immigrant to St. John and New Brunswick. I moved here about 2 years ago from rural Nova Scotia, the Annapolis Valley. So I find that the Annapolis Valley and rural Nova Scotia in general has a lot of the same socioeconomic issues that we find in lower income communities within St. John, such as Crescent Valley or Old North End. And I mean, it's not limited to those areas. It's kind of across the board to some degree. But that's kind of like, I am familiar with the issues. As I said, I've experienced them firsthand, and I see them happening here as well. Right. So, I mean, as I said, I am relatively new to New Brunswick as well.
Mm-hmm.
But where I'm seeing the same issues, poverty, it doesn't really change its form all that much between different areas. It kind of ends up with the same big things, underfunded public transportation, which restricts people's ability to go to job interviews or hold down jobs, get to like health care, even just getting groceries. If you're in a situation where you're struggling to make ends meet, a car is often completely out of reach. So you need that well-functioning and high coverage public transit option. And as I said, that's something that I'm seeing an issue with here in New Brunswick and in particular St. John right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So I've already touched on the fact that, I have been homeless. I have dealt with being in a low-income situation that it was very difficult to get out of. And honestly, I wouldn't have gotten out of it without help from people kind of outside the system that I was working in, which I'm very thankful for. But I also have other experience as well. So I've run a small business back in Nova Scotia, so I have some experience with how things can affect small businesses when you're talking about things like increasing the minimum wage, which, other parties or my opponents would often argue is something that a small business would not be able to financially deal with. And from my own experience running a small business, I very much disagree with that assessment.
Oh.
Right? So, in my opinion, if you are unable to pay your workers or your employees a living wage, you are unable to have employees at that point. You're expanding your business too quickly, and you're exploiting other people in order to do it. Which is something I strongly disagree with.
Yes.
And from running my own business, I know that it is possible to run a small business in a way that is socially responsible. Because I've done it.
That is.
So.
Yeah, that's valuable experience.
Okay, so top 5 priorities, just kind of a quick bullet list.
Yeah.
Number one, increased funding for public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
We've had our public transit in St. John cut back quite a bit in recent years. We need to not only undo the damage that was done by that, but we need to increase funding beyond that because it was still lacking even at the pre-cut level.
Mm-hmm.
I'd focus on tax reform, particularly on heavy industry. Our heavy industry is taxed at a much lower rate than similar areas throughout Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So they're definitely not paying their fair share, and it's causing issues with city funding. And, public transportation is a municipal controlled issue, but the province can help by, allowing that tax reform as well as allowing municipalities to keep more of the taxes generated within them.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to push for an overhaul of our social assistance program.
Okay.
It is wholly inadequate, even compared to our neighboring Nova Scotia. As I said, I'm quite familiar with how the Nova Scotia assistance program works, having experienced it firsthand.
Yes.
New Brunswick, for a single mother with child, the maximum amount you can get per month is $861.
Wow.
And if you're spending about a quarter of your income on housing, that would only leave you with about $200 to $300 for somewhere to live, and that is just something that you cannot find in St. John.
Yes.
It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So we need to increase social assistance rates, but also the way our social assistance works is that if you even do manage to find a job and start bringing some money in,
Mm-hmm.
that comes out of your social assistance at 100% first.
Yes.
So if you were to make $500 with a part-time job in a month, you're actually worse off than when you hadn't been working at all, because you're still working with the same amount of income, but now you have the increased costs of having to get to and from work.
Mm-hmm.
In Nova Scotia, the way it works is there's a certain amount that you just keep 100% of. Like, it doesn't come out of your social assistance at all.
Yeah.
I believe it's up to the first $500, I believe, that you make in a month. It just does not detract from your social assistance at all. And then after that, you keep 30% of whatever you make beyond that $500. So
I like
you
that.
never end up in a situation where you're worse off by working.
Yes.
You're always able to work towards improving your situation, and that also incentivizes people to go find work if they can, which
Yes.
is something that our current system does not do in any way, shape, or form. It actually disincentivizes finding work. Yeah, so that's actually been a big issue that's been being talked about recently, even like among the NDP, specifically focusing around the Clinic 554 in Fredericton.
Yes.
And how it's essentially the Conservative government is refusing to fund it.
Yes.
The abortions there. And as far as I can tell, that's actually a violation of the Canada Health Act to start with.
Mm-hmm.
His response has been to take him to court, which I feel like is an unnecessarily hostile stance to be taking with the people that you're supposed to be leading.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I feel like not only should we be funding 554, but I think what they're doing and how they're doing it is actually a really good model for expanding healthcare throughout the province. Because right now we have a very centralized system that's very general, catch-all. It doesn't really focus on the specific issues of particular neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with a clinic model, if there's somewhere that just isn't having a particular health issue, they can pivot to provide health care that is more focused on what the people in the neighborhood need rather than trying to do everything and having increased costs because of that. Again, somewhere that we're currently very weak. We definitely need to expand those options, and I feel like that can kind of roll into that local health clinic model,
Mm-hmm.
where if it's an area that is having a lot of mental health issues or a lot of addiction issues, then that's giving them that flexibility to really focus on those issues and provide really good care in that direction. Right. So on this issue, I admit that I'm not particularly educated on it. The party as a whole is definitely supporting banning it. There seems to be quite a negative impact on wildlife and just natural areas in the province. But beyond that, I don't know enough to really comment on in specifics. Yeah, so that's something that we're definitely lacking on. Even me, where I'm actually have a fairly well-paying job right now, even I'm having difficulty finding a house that I could actually afford to purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's also apartment living. That's what I'm currently doing. But buying a house in the long term generally is much cheaper than renting.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we should be investing in more housing that is available to people on lower incomes, because that can itself be a path out of poverty. Just owning your own home and having those lower payments, is a lot of the times after you can get past the initial down payment, which is the big stumbling block, or like getting the mortgage in the first place, the payments themselves are usually about half of what you'd be paying for rent in like a similar accommodation, right? So that obviously frees up a lot more of your finances, but if you're in a low-income situation, it's really hard to get the down payment or get the mortgage in the first place to get out. That said, I also think that we should be building more mixed-income neighborhoods, and this is something that I mentioned in my interview with the HDC on Friday, is that when we segregate different income levels into different neighborhoods, there becomes a tendency to pretend that the issues that are happening in low-income neighborhoods don't exist. And I understand why the impulse is to do that. At least for me, it's heartbreaking seeing what could go on in some low-income neighborhoods, just because they're desperate. It's hard to keep a roof over your head. It's hard to keep food on the table. You're worried basically all the time, and you're just living with stress and fear 24/7. But it's something that we really need to actually pay attention to. We need to stop avoiding uncomfortable truths about our society, and how to prop up a few, we end up throwing a lot of people under the bus, so to speak. Yeah, this one, I have some admittedly mixed feelings on.
Okay.
I've been doing a fair amount of reading on it. The amounts that we're paying for police do seem really high when I look at them in isolation. But when you compare them to similar areas, it starts looking more like we're underpaying them, if anything. And then when you mix that in with the financial troubles that the city has been having, it kind of creates this miasma of uncertainty as to like how to handle that situation. I think what I mentioned earlier with the increases to heavy industry taxation and reforming how much money municipalities get to keep from the taxation that happens within them would help alleviate some of those issues.
Yes.
I had also done a little questionnaire from Paula Radwin Donovan, who
Yes.
I think is running for councillor in Ward 4 in the next municipal,
Yes.
specifically regarding the binding arbitration reforms that the city has been asking for. And I do support binding arbitration reform. Some of the things that they're asking for actually make a lot of sense to me, and don't really understand why they're not already a thing, such as transparency and why decisions are made in particular ways, so that all parties can be like, okay, so this is why this amount is being given or denied, with evidence to back up why that decision was made that way. I do think that the binding arbitration should take into account whether it's fair based on other municipalities. So, if we're talking the big three cities, Fredericton, St. John, Moncton, we should be trying to keep a fairly similar compensation package between them. However, I don't agree with them trying to make ability to pay, and I'm doing air quotes on that, a core reason that has to be taken into account in the binding arbitration. Mostly just because I feel that ability to pay is something that is too easy to manipulate. It's easy to throw a bunch of money into a big infrastructure project like a granite court building and then suddenly say, oh, look, we have no money. I feel like it lets them off the hook a little too much for fiscal responsibility. So, yeah. Right, okay, so I don't know a whole lot about this issue personally.
Okay.
I do think they should, like any sort of reports of sexual assaults, should be taken seriously and should be investigated. But yeah, I also think that we should have some sort of watchdog for the police forces to ensure that things are actually being investigated properly. So, which is something that I don't believe we currently have in New Brunswick. Right. So, as I mentioned already, I would want to increase taxation on heavy industry. Sometimes people say that, oh, well, if you increase taxation, they'll just leave. I feel like that's an empty argument. There's way too much money in heavy industry for them to be willing to just drop it. And even if they did, someone else would swoop in, like one of their competitors would swoop in very short order to pick up the torch, so to speak. So I'm not particularly worried about, that getting abandoned.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then also, as I mentioned, I would push to allow municipalities to keep more of the taxes that they generate within themselves to help alleviate the squeeze that's been being felt really across New Brunswick as a whole. Right. So that's going back right to the beginning there. We need to increase our public transit, both in amount of area it covers, but also in the times that it's available. So, we've had to cut it recently because we don't have enough money. So with the proposed tax reforms, we start getting more revenue into the city. We can undo those cuts while possibly even expanding it further, which is something that's come up a lot as I've talked to constituents in the area. And so one of the platform commitments for the NDP is to provide affordable childcare. The plan behind it is really to integrate it into the school system, both before and after school. We want to provide it at a flat cost of $10 per day per child, which is a lot easier to swallow than most daycares that are out there right now. Obviously, those private daycares would still be able to operate if that's where the parents wanted to send them, but this would be a public option that would be available for people that either can't afford those private daycares or, just want them to be at the school and, with where their friends may very well be as well. Okay, so
I like most people have had a bit of a chuckle, like, oh yeah.
There's a little bit of an extra nugget of fun there for me because I actually work for Brunswick News.
Oh, okay.
So running as an NDP candidate has been interesting. We'll describe it that way.
Okay.
They haven't discouraged me from running by any means at all. It's just once some people in the company found out that I was running, I've been finding myself in a lot more political conversations at work than I'm used to.
Yes, that makes sense. Yes.
Honestly, I do think that we need more diversification of media ownership in the province. I'm sure most people are aware that Brunswick News owns basically all of the English newspapers in the province and a good chunk of the French ones.
Mm-hmm.
That is, in my opinion, bad, and I'm hoping that I don't, get in too much trouble for saying that, but it's what I believe. So,
well, that's why we're talking, right? To kind of figure these things out. So I really appreciate your honesty.
Yeah, and really what it comes down to is we need to have more diverse viewpoints represented in the media in the province.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and that's where, well, just for myself, like I couldn't imagine anyone saying the complete opposite of what you just said. So I don't see any harm coming from this.
You understood why I laughed when you asked the question, though, right?
Yes. Well, maybe we'll have to. Maybe we could chat about that another time. Oh, gee. Well, and on that note, that's our final question. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I'll just kind of go over, make some quick notes, and I will send that your way just so then you can see what we're going to be putting up. And we will be in touch.
All right.
All right, fantastic.
Thanks for talking to me.
Thank you again.
Right.
Bye.